Right now on It's Gonna Be Fine, quick update on that JP Morgan story from last week. Also, Adrien Brody isolates himself for a Broadway role, which leads to a discussion on who should play whom. And somehow we end up talking about looks maxing again, hopefully for the last time. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the It's Gonna Be Fine podcast. So glad you're here. I'm particularly excited. We're recording this on a Friday before a long weekend. Hopefully you have some fun plans. If you're traveling or staying local, whatever you are doing, I hope you enjoy it. And hopefully we get some summer. Not all the cities in the country have been feeling the summer effect just yet. So maybe with Memorial Day being the unofficial start of summer, we'll start to see some of that. To kick it off, last week we talked about this story out of JP Morgan, the lawsuit that the employee filed. And I mentioned that if there were updates, I would share them with you. And yes, there are some updates. In fact, the plaintiff was countersued by the defendant. So quickly, the plaintiff, Sharayu Rana, who had sued and asked JP Morgan for $22 million, claiming that a executive had participated in sexual misconduct against him. And now she has filed a countersuit against him. So the drama continues. It was kind of odd because in one of the articles I saw about this, they had talked about how people were betting. Like today's day and age, everyone just bets on everything through Kalshi or Polymarket, whatever. And apparently on Polymarket, the odds were like 70% that he would be sued himself. And yep, that's what happened. Really quickly, just some of the points that were made in the countersuit by the original defendant, Lorna Haidini. And it continues to speak to what we talked about last week, which is who knows who to believe anymore. She claims that all of what he claimed are malicious lies, that they've destroyed her reputation, wreaked havoc on her life. This specifically is from Reuters, but a lot of outlets have been covering it. She claimed that he fabricated allegations that she raped and drugged him, and he did that in order to attract maximum press coverage. And she is suing for defamation, emotional distress, and other claims. So that continues. We'll see what the truth ultimately reveals and how this one develops. But for whatever reason, I'm drawn to this one. There was just some things about this case that I'm following. So if there's anything interesting, you will hear it from me. But we're not going to spend the whole show talking again about this JP Morgan case and bizarre employee claims and behavior. So let's move uptown from Wall Street to Broadway, because there is a show on Broadway now starring Adrien Brody. He's making his Broadway debut in this play called The Fear of 13. And there's been some decent press about this too, which has brought up this question about what actually is acting, who should play certain roles, and where does lived experience come into play versus becoming someone completely different than who you are. So The Fear of 13, it's about this person named Nick Yaris. He is a man who spent 20 plus years on death row in Pennsylvania for a crime he didn't commit. And then he was exonerated by DNA evidence. And so the play is about that journey for him and the relationships that he developed during that time. He, I think, developed kind of a romantic connection with the legal advocate who was fighting on his behalf to get him exonerated. This particularly caught my attention because when Cindy was on and we were chatting about legal topics and expert witness testimony, and we talked a bit about the Innocence Project and their work to exonerate people through DNA who were wrongly convicted. And Cindy shared how interning at the Innocence Project gave her a unique perspective on court cases and convictions So this was pretty timely. And when I saw this, I was immediately brought back to that conversation. If you're not familiar with the Innocence Project, definitely check it out. They do some incredible work. But anyway, he's starring in this play. And what a lot of the publications are covering and chatting with him is he has implemented some form of, I guess you would call it method acting for this show and for the role he's playing, where he has been isolating himself for most of the day. So he does the show, but he's been keeping himself quite isolated. He refers to it as he's isolating himself just like the character was isolated in prison. But he does say the isolation he's going through barely scratches the surface of what the isolation that Mr. Yaris had gone through. So Wall Street Journal covered this, Interview Magazine covered this. And, I say some sort of method acting because there's probably different levels of it. If you're not familiar, method acting is when the actor fully embodies the character and becomes them, even when not on stage or in the film or whatever it is that they're doing. He's still giving interviews. He's not fully he has not fully taken on this character in all moments of his life, but he is trying to set himself up with an experience to help identify and connect himself to the character. So it's a really interesting way. Some actors take it to more extremes than others. And just like we typically talk about on the show, things that are going on in the world tend to spark bigger questions. Before we jump into that, a little story time. You may or may not know, but one of the reasons I think these stories catch me as well is because I actually tried my hand at acting back in the day in college, so nothing crazy. Although I do have an IMDb credit. If you're interested, you can check it out, and there's proof for a little, I don't know if I'd call it a short film. I think it was like a feature film. It was like a 45-minute film that I somehow met this director and ended up being in it. It was a tiny part where I played restaurant guest number 2. But I still remember it. It was fun. Anyway, I did, I took acting classes. I did some theater. I was in some shows. And for me, I actually obviously didn't pursue it. And the reason for that mostly was because I actually did not enjoy the process of acting. So the thing that I did enjoy, and I think a lot of people enjoy about it, and this is what most people see, is that end result, right? Like once you have a play on its feet and you know all your lines and everything's clicking and working, that could be super fun. And that was. But the whole process leading up to it for me, the rehearsal, memorizing lines, developing the character, making choices about the character, like that for me was very, very draining. And a good indication for me, if I like something, is am I enjoying the process? Not necessarily just the end result, but do I enjoy getting to that end result? If the answer for me is no, that's a good indication that this is not something I'm meant to be doing. And if the answer is yes, then it's a great indication that, hey, you might have found something that you like. And a great example of that is this podcast. So I love the prep work that goes into the shows and the episodes. I love deciding what to discuss. I love reaching out to potential guests and engaging with them. I really enjoy the editing process, which surprised me. That tells me, and of course I love the end product as well. So that's a strong indication that I'm hopefully doing what I should be doing, and I'm going to keep doing it. I've had jobs in the past where, I like going to work. I don't get the Sunday scaries. I get like the Sunday anticipations, the Sunday excitement, like, hey, I get to go to my fun, cool job. I know I sound like a dork and a lot of people are probably like, you're insane, but that's true. Not every job has been like that. And that's also an indication, like if I do get the Sunday scaries, then maybe that means it's time to look for something else. So that's kind of the method that I use. So clearly the process did not work for me. If we think about very successful actors, they focus really intensely on the process. So look at Adrien Brody, who's going through some extreme methods to connect to this character and to give an authentic performance by isolating himself. I think it said something like in some studio apartment or small apartment in New York City where he just stays inside and doesn't really do anything, almost like his own version of a prison cell. And he did the same for, if you remember the show or the movie, The Pianist, also a similar sort of, method acting where he turned himself into the character and went through extremes to become that character. And then it just made me think there are some other examples too. Like we think about Christian Bale has done this before. It's been pretty public where he's lost like a ton of weight to do that. Also, Matthew McConaughey did that for Dallas Buyers Club. So there's probably plenty of examples of actors who go to these extremes to really become those characters. And it's a spectrum. Different actors do different things, prepare different ways. That was one of the things I found hard about it too, is I never knew how far to go and was I doing enough? And there was always this question in the back of my mind of like, well, should I be doing more? Do I need to do more research? Do I need to make another choice? So it was just this never ending thing for me that I couldn't ultimately feel good about. So it just wasn't for me. Acting is this craft of becoming someone else and portraying someone else and not doing things that you usually do. That's the thrill of it for a lot of people. But then there's the flip side of it, which is the people that say that actually what's important with acting is not so much becoming such a different version of someone than you are, but that lived experience should be a priority. We see this discussed from time to time where, things like people say that if the character is an LGBTQ character, then it should be played by an LGBTQ actor versus a straight actor. If the character is a disabled person, it should be played by a disabled actor, not an able-bodied person. And the real, I think, reason behind this is because these people historically, so underrepresented groups, has been excluded from playing themselves, right? They haven't had the opportunities that other people have had from, to act or perform in these roles. I struggle a bit because if you think about the lived experience piece, doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose of what acting is, which is playing something or playing someone who's not you and becoming that character? And you could say, and specifically, it should be as different from you as possible because that shows your acting range. And those opportunities are some of the most exciting ones for actors. I think there's merit to both arguments. And as you might expect, I land somewhere in the middle. I think if someone can only realistically play certain roles, then I would say, yes, those opportunities should be prioritized for them. So what that means is if we think about a disabled person versus an able-bodied person, a wheelchair user is naturally going to face limitations auditioning for a huge range of traditionally able-bodied roles. So if that's the case, we should not be taking those opportunities away from those artists at all. In a recent example, if you saw the Wicked movie, the actress who plays Nessa, who is in a wheelchair in the show, in the movie, this actress also was in a wheelchair, and that was celebrated as it should be. She came to the red carpets, and it was great to see someone given an opportunity to play that role using their lived experience. I think it gets a little bit grayer for me when we're talking about roles like, let's say, a gay character or a trans character, and straight people potentially playing those, because that is realistic, right? It is possible for a straight person to play a gay person, just like it's possible for a gay person to play a straight person. So no one is excluded necessarily from being able to do that, and those opportunities should exist for both. The problem is that structural inequities still exist. So while acting requires transformation, and that's a beautiful part of it, if we're not fixing those structural inequities, then we still need to put a big emphasis on lived experience, because that will allow us to reduce and get rid of and knock down some of those structural inequities that still exist today. There's another piece of this conversation that we should talk about too, which is the idea that actors with disabilities shouldn't only be limited to explicitly disabled roles. Because sometimes a character maybe was simply imagined one way originally, but maybe it doesn't like actually have to be that way. So I was thinking about this after hearing actress Jamie Lynn Sigler. She was on The Sopranos and she lives with MS. She also did a guest star on one of my favorite shows, Will and Grace. Like it was one of their Thanksgiving episodes and one of my favorites. She was incredible. So check that out if you want. But anyway, she was talking about acting and disability on a podcast recently. And one of the things she discussed was how part of reducing stigma around disability is really just like simply casting and hiring people with disabilities more often and just making it less unusual or atypical. And what I took away from that was this idea that maybe an actor can bring something unexpected to a role that actually enhances the story. Like maybe the character wasn't originally written that way. Maybe that wasn't the original vision of the creator or the writer, but maybe that difference that the actor brings adds depth or humanity or a new perspective that maybe wasn't considered before. And if we can become more open to that, maybe that's another way to break down some of these barriers while still keeping the focus on the artistry. I would love to get to a place where acting is acting and anyone can play anything. Again, that's realistically possible for them. I think the focus will always just have to be on casting in the most artistic way we can, and maybe on a case by case basis, determining what decisions have to be made around lived experience for this particular role, for this particular show, for this particular character that will serve it best. A lot easier said than done. So, as is kind of typical, I don't have like a actual answer with this, but reading about this show and Adrien Brody really got me thinking more about this topic of actors playing a whole variety of parts and where the lived experience comes in. And of course, I'm really curious what you think. I'm sure there's a lot more nuance to it, and there's probably some other examples that I haven't brought up. But if you have any thoughts about this, I'd love to hear them. Of course, Instagram DM. The show is at it's gonna be fine _pod, and the emails are always open. It's gonna be fine podcast at gmail.com. Before we wrap with this one today, one last thing that I wanted to touch on, and you're going to hear this and be like, oh my God, he's talking about it again. So I promise I will stop after this, at least for a while. Can't say I'll never bring it up again. But yes, I know we've talked a lot about looks maxing. It's still everywhere. It's not going away. I know it's only been like a week since we talked about it. But some of you have brought to my attention that there's other types of maxings out there. So I've heard about now protein maxing, fiber maxing. So those are pretty self-explanatory. People who are trying to get as much protein as possible so they can be as strong as possible, and all of that. And fiber maxing, eat as much fiber as you can. It's so good for you, which fiber is good for you. But the problem with both of these things, protein maxing and fiber maxing, is that there is a limit. Like you can do harm to your body if you eat too much protein. Specifically, I believe the impact can be to your kidneys. And then with fiber, if you eat too much fiber, that could also lead to gastro issues, all sorts of issues if you're eating, especially if you're eating too much too fast. I have personal experience with this. I've really, over the last, year, I've definitely been trying to increase my fiber. And I think went way too overboard, and I had some really bad gastro stuff for a while. And finally, I was trying to figure out what it was, and I finally saw the doctor, and he was like, yeah, you're eating, you got to cut some of these foods out that are high fiber. And he listed like all these healthy foods. And I was like, you want me to stop eating these? And he's like, well, just for a while to see, or at least minimize them to see if it helps. And you know what? It did. I was overdoing the fiber. My body was like, no, this is too much. So good reminder that yes, there are things that are good for us, but too much of anything is usually not a good idea. And what I found for myself is anytime I quote unquote max something or try to eat a ton of it, I end up overdoing it, and I, suffer some sort of consequence potentially from it. I mean, you could drink too much water as well. Like there's a limit with that too. So keep that in mind. But the real the real maxing thing that I just wanted to touch on, and it's so stupid and ridiculous to me. But so we've got protein looks maxing, protein maxing, fiber maxing. There is this concept now called ballmaxxing. And I'm going to give you a second just to think about what that might be. Yes, you are correct. That is when someone injects their scrotum with like a saline solution and maybe something else, or there are some other solutions you could inject that make your scrotum and your testicles look bigger or become bigger. Why? Why is that important? I want to know. Like, is it a confidence thing? Even though you're really the only one for the most part that sees them, it's not like, everyone can see, like they can see your jawline. They can't see that. So is it just about your own personal confidence? And apparently the bigger, the better with that. I'm just waiting for like the next one. How crazy can we get with this? And I actually really don't want to know the answer to that. And I hope people don't figure it out. But I don't know, injecting something into one of the most sensitive and important parts of your body. So just more ridiculousness. But once I heard that, I knew I had to share it. And like I said, I hope you won't hear me say anything maxing for quite a while. All right, that does it for this episode of It's Gonna Be Fine. Let's see. The world is strange, people are complicated, we're constantly juggling different needs at once, and the internet remains deeply unwell. But I think we can choose to spend more time on the things that energize us instead of the things that just make us roll our eyes. Whether that's creating more opportunities for artists, finding joy in the process, or just taking a second to slow down and relax. And honestly, that's what gives me confidence that it's gonna be fine. We'll see you next time.